Welcome back. We're going to start the final layer of paint in our painting of the ear cast. And now for the first time we're going to have to mix a palette in grayscale. So we'll begin by setting up the palette with black and raw umber on one side, a little bit of raw umber, not much, and a lot of white on the other side. We're going to combine the black and the raw umber to just warm it a little bit. That's probably more than I need, but and we're just going to put one little glob of black in the middle. We're going to wipe our palette knives clean. Take about twice as much white and mix that really well. And this should get us pretty close to a middle gray. It should seem about halfway between here and here. I would say mine's a little dark, so I'm going to wipe my knife again. Take a little more white. And that looks all right. So this is a 3-step value string. And now we're going to go to 2 more steps. We're going to take a big, about half of this middle gray, and mix it again with just a little bit of the black mixture. And again, we're aiming for this to be halfway between these two, and I would say once again I don't have enough of the lighter mixture, so no, actually these are a little too close together. Maybe a little more dark. Maybe a little too much white in that one. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I'm going to make a little pile of that. Wipe my palette knife again. And I'm going to take a little bit of this one and add it to a greater quantity of white. And that gets us to a 5-step value scale. Now I'm just going to organize my paint by moving it to the other side of the sheet. Give me a little more mixing room. And I need to make one that's between these two, so I'm going to take some of that and mix it with the black that's left behind over here. Now I'm going to take this one, again get rid of most of it, put it over here, and then I'm going to mix some of this lighter mixture again with what's left behind. And I'm going to take this one just as it was, add some of this to it, mix it with what's left this one as it is. Take some of the white, mix it with what's left behind. And then finally the pure white at the end. And that is a 9-step value scale. It's not perfect, but it's adequate for what we're doing. It's actually easier for me in real life to see some of these differences. They kind of get lost, it looks like, on the camera a little bit, but what I'm aiming for is 9 even steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So what I've just done is put a picture of my grayscale for my palette onto the photograph of the ear that we're working from. And I converted that photograph into grayscale because we're not going to try to match the yellowy tones of the ear cast. We're just going to be painting it in grayscale. And what I'm going to be able to show you using this tool is how our values correspond to the values on the palette. So what I can do is we're going to start with these background values, with the lightest being up in the upper left, a little darker in the lower left, and then the darkest in the lower right. So to establish what those values are, I'm going to just pick up little color samples from the palette, like this. And by clicking on the sample, I can take this number 7 gray and see if we need to use it anywhere. You can see that it's too light for down here. It's just right for in here, and it's too dark for up here. Way too light for this. Let's see if I can find this value, upper left. And I click on number 8. And that's pretty close. Try number 7 again. Yeah, so it's almost number 8 up here. And what do we have down in the lower left, I wonder? Let's see, maybe a number 3. Let's pick up number 3. Yeah, so you got the number 3 really disappears right in here. So I want to show you just how dark black looks. This is number 1. See, we're not really going to need that anywhere, which makes sense because we're painting objects that are gray or light gray. So, and number 2, let's see. See, number 2 is going to be our accent shadow color. You see it in a few spots, like right in there. And what about up in the upper right? See, that's pretty close to number 8. I want you to pay attention to what's happening when we move these squares around. Like, let me pick up a number 6. You see how dark that looks if we put it up here? And if we slide it down here,
You see how it looks pretty light? That's called simultaneous contrast. We read values in their context, and they look much lighter when they have dark around them, and they look much darker when they have light around them. I know it's hard to believe this is the same gray, but I guarantee you that it is. So this method is going to help us avoid the kind of mistakes that we might make otherwise. And you can do something similar by making a grayscale on an old paint stick or something and just holding it up. But this way I can show you how it works on the computer. So again, number 7 is, this was going to be number 8, I think. Yeah, number 8 is our brightest value for the light side. And number 3 is going to be our main shadow color over here. So that'll help us get started. So with that in mind, we're going to take a large brush and a little bit of water, and we're going to put some between 7 and 8 all up in here. Remember, part of the beauty of this kind of painting is that the tone shows through the final coat of paint. So don't use a ton of water to thin your paint, but you can definitely thin it and spread it pretty thin. And I can already see that I probably should have mixed a little more paint at the beginning, but not having enough paint is going to encourage me to paint thinly, which is probably good. And as we move down, notice we're getting a little darker, so we're going to move into just pure number 7. And remember also that it's okay to let a little paint slip over the ear. We're just going to paint over that later. And that's better than leaving a little orange halo around everything. Notice if you put too much water in your paint, it's going to go on a little bit lighter. And then as soon as that water evaporates, it's going to darken a little. Remember also that the reason the old masters used this method of painting, which we call indirect, using an underpainting, is because they had to grind all their paint by hand, which was a very laborious process, so they wouldn't be piling the paint on the way a lot of kids in art school still do today. So there's the light part of the background. And if you were paying attention in class, you would realize that we would not want to go in now and start painting the ear because, why? Because we have a shadow edge that we need to blend. We're going to have this nice soft transition here and another one up along this edge, along here. So while we're painting today in this session, we have to paint the shadow color in, maybe paint a thin band of an intermediate value in between, and then blend our edges with a dry brush. So I'm going to wash my brush a little. And now I'm going to go to my number 3 value. I don't recommend that you put your palette on the painting like this. I just want you to be able to see what I'm doing. Number 3 value, and that looks about right. Again, if you put the paint on so thick that you can't see the brown through it anymore, then it's too thick. And remember that got a little dark right under the ear, a little darker. So we're going to put on a little bit of, mix just a little number 2 value into there. Since I am going to be referring to these values by number, you might want to double check and make sure that yours are pretty close to what mine were. But a good way to tell you're on the right track is if the paint you're putting on now is just a little darker than your underpainting. Because the underpainting, remember, was supposed to be a kind of bleached out version of the final effect. So before I blend the edge, because this is such a big difference from here to here, I'm going to take some of my number 5 value, which is sort of right in between those two, and I'm going to lay it in along that edge. And I'm just going to paint like a stripe of number 5, about as wide as that area of diffusion. Notice how it's getting a little smaller up here when it gets close to the object, a little wider down here, and then it's a pretty small stripe down here. So now we're going to do some blending, and be sure that you clean and dry your brush. And I'm actually going to just start with a new one. It's tough to blend with a wet brush. And I'm going to hatch across this edge like this. I'm going to zoom in on this so you can see what I'm doing better. And I'm going to zoom in on it over here too. I just noticed, now that I'm zoomed in, I need to sort of pull a little more of this shadow on the wall. Goes up a little higher than I remembered it. So now we hatch across this edge. That's on the left-hand side of our stripe. And wipe the brush. And now hatch across the right-hand edge of the stripe. Like this. And some artists like to leave things brushy like this. Notice I'm doing this hatching with a very small brush. I can even see I'm shaping my shadow a little bit, pushing it up into the ear there. Instead of leaving mine brushy though, I'm going to show you how to take it the rest of the way, which is to get rid of the brush strokes. And so I'm going to take a slightly bigger, clean, dry brush. And I'm going to brush along with the edge. And if that doesn't look soft enough, which it doesn't, I can go back and hatch again. And the whole process is just alternating, hatching across the edge, and then sweeping with the edge. Because that paint's so thin, it's very easy to soften the edge, and if I wanted to actually tighten it a little, I could pick up just a little bit of my number 7.5 value, and that was the background color in this area, and I can go back and just slightly kind of tighten that edge too, because it looked maybe a little too fuzzy right there. And that's all there is to it. Maybe a little more softening here, a little bit across, and a little bit up and down. And we're going to shift now and go to our other edge that we need to blend, which is this one. And again, taking my smaller brush, wiping it off, and hatching across the edge where my number 5 meets my number 7. It's funny, that number 5 doesn't look any lighter than the number 3. I'm going to put a little bit of number 6 in there to make a little more of a transition area. looks better. So hatching across the edge. That's the outside edge first. Now I'm going to hatch across the inside edge. I notice that I'm using bigger strokes down here. Where it's really soft, and then smaller strokes as I move up here towards the ear. The closer a cast shadow comes to the object that's casting the shadow, the more focused the shadow is. Now, as I said before, it's not too late to make corrections, so I can see a little problem in the shape of my shadow here. I can see that it really is supposed to be kind of coming out a little more to here, a little more extreme S-curve. So this is not like doing a needle point. We do not want to just sort of turn off our brains as we're painting. If we see something that looks a little off, we can move things around a little. That's really important, because the further along these paintings get, the more those errors are going to jump out at us. We need to take advantage of that. So there's a little hatching along there. And I guess I'm going to have to move my big dark over a little bit too. So I'm going to go back down to my number 3 value and just push that dark out a little bit. Notice I was already into blending, but I saw a problem, and I just going back and correcting it. And noticing also smaller and smaller hatching strokes as I get up close to the ear, and then these longer strokes when I get into the really blurry area. Just kind of scrubbing that edge away a little bit. So now I go back to my clean dry brush, medium-sized one, and I start sweeping along with the edge. That's going to tighten the edge again a little bit, but it's also going to get rid of my brush strokes here. Again, keep your paint really thin. These edges are so much easier to manage with thin paint. So I'm pretty happy with this edge now. I'm just going to fuzz it out a little more towards the outside. If you find that you're moving too much dark into your light areas, just keep wiping that brush off. And now I can see that there's some internal edges. Like right in here, I'm going to wipe my brush off and just want to even out some of this stuff. And right down here where we switched from the sort of like number 2.5 to number 3, that should be a softer transition too. So I'm going to do some big hatching strokes across that transition. I'm I'm going to cover up all the orange along the edge of my ear. And I'm going to just pop in a little more pure number 2 right up next to that ear where it gets, shadow gets the darkest. I'm tempted to put some black in there, but remember, we checked and we didn't see any black in our shadows in this thing, so it's just going to be a little bit darker, the number 2 gray. And I don't really need to sharpen this edge because it's okay if the color of the ear overlaps it a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and sharpen it anyway just because it's satisfying to clean it up a little. So that's the first stage of painting right there. And just trying to get to where you can see the whole thing. And we're going to stop here so that you can get caught up, and I'd like to have a look at these before you go any further, just to make sure you're on the right track. And we will start painting the ear itself in the next video. So until then, thanks a lot, and see you soon.